So, back when I was watching this absolutely phenomenal episode of ReZero, I was reminded of a certain scene from Isekai Quartet where Roswaal was giving a lesson on rabbits and what they ate. That being the case, I figured that now would be as good a time as any to continue going through some more Easter eggs and references. You know, subtle things like nods to certain character traits or homages to specific characters that you may not have noticed. So, let's go through episodes 4 to 6 of Season 2 and see what we can find. But first, this video is sponsored by Heir of Light, a free-to-play mobile fantasy RPG that's currently going through a collaboration event with Tower of God. Since I'm sure that many of you are already familiar with my Tower of God series, I figured that you may be interested in checking out another game where you can play as some of its iconic characters, of which you can choose between getting Bam, Yuri, or White for free just by opening the game. They're part of a collection of over 350 servants that you can summon for your crusade. A PvE journey across the world map where every battle is a boss battle. Not only that, but every square on the map is a unique battle to be fought, giving you the freedom of choice to open up the map whichever way you please. You can also take your uniquely customized team online and challenge other players in PvP, testing your ability to make the most out of the different servant roles and their skill or gear combinations. So, if you're interested in playing Heir of Light and checking out the Tower of God collaboration event, then feel free to use the link in the description to start playing for free today. Now, let's get back to the video. Starting off with episode 4, there's actually a very interesting reason behind Ainz's lack of confidence with regards to passing the test. One that relates back to the human he used to be and the world that he used to live in. Something you may not know is that the person who used to be Ainz originally came from a very dystopian society. A place commonly referred to in the novels as the world of 2138. This wasn't the ideal futuristic society that anyone could have imagined though. The environment had been all but destroyed by constant pollution. The government was taken over by megacorporations and hyper-rich conglomerates. Society had essentially crumbled into fragments and pieces of what it once was. Because of this, education became one of the major societal aspects impacted by this new world order. You see, the corporations that took over as the ruling sector of Japan also reworked the way that the educational system was run, and they did so while keeping it under the guise of managing public expenditure. But really what they were trying to do was control the masses. By removing the poor's ability to think critically, it makes it a whole lot easier to control them, ensuring that the lower working class would forever stay cogs in the machine that the wealthy upper class had built. They dismantled all forms of compulsory education, then proceeded to make every level of schooling require a high tuition. If parents wanted their children to go to school so that they could in turn find a job, then they would have to work long hours in order to afford the cost of doing so. Such was the case with Ainz's parents. They were able to afford the tuition that came with sending him to elementary school. But as we learn from this episode, Ainz never actually finished middle school. He was, however, able to find a low income level job, which honestly was probably more important than actually finishing school. So if we're strictly talking about school-based intellect, then Ainz really isn't that smart at all. It's why he was so worried about failing the test and even doing worse than Aqua. It's after this that we see Kazuma make a comment on Aqua's low intelligence stat, a stat that can literally never increase because she's already maxed out on everything. But don't get me wrong, that's not to say that she has the highest level intelligence that anyone can have. It just means that it's the highest level intelligence that she can have. So it doesn't matter how hard she studies or tries, it's quite literally impossible for her to get any smarter. On the other hand, right before the test we also see Megumin make her own comment on her and Kazuma's intelligence. When she says that Kazuma isn't as smart as her, well, that's actually a genuine fact. Although it may not seem like it, Megumin has the highest intelligence out of all 4 of the party members. It's how she was able to earn the classification of Archwizard whereas Aqua was not. It's because having high intelligence is one of the requirements for gaining the title. Without it, she would just be a lowly archpriest like Aqua. When in the library, Puck says a line that I personally found to be rather interesting. He says that he doesn't ever feel sleepy while in this world, which is interesting because we know that Puck relies on mana in order to maintain his physical form. It's only after he expends too much of it that he starts to become sleepy, resulting in him having to go into his dormant-like state so that he can reaccumulate mana from the atmosphere. So if Puck no longer feels sleepy at any point during the day, then that means that something must be sustaining his source of mana. It leads me to believe that perhaps the world of Isekai Quartet is one that is supported by a very strong magical foundation, one that allows Puck to exist in his physical form without the mana limitations that are typically imposed on him. Moving on to the test, it's implied by Ainz that only those who possess godlike powers or are gods themselves are capable of being immune to time stop. I mean, it is a 10th tier spell which roughly translates to a power level of 64 and above in Yggdrasil, which isn't necessarily godlike but still very powerful for sure. It makes you wonder then how exactly Tanya and Subaru were immune. Well, Tanya's conversations with Being X typically occur within a similar dimension where time is frozen. So it stands to reason that a side effect of these conversations with God could also manifest a resistance or general immunity to time-based magic. Subaru, on the other hand, has a power that is deeply rooted in the foundations of time. So that fact in itself could be what it is that grants him his immunity to time stop. But if we consider again Ainz's words about how gods or those close to gods are the ones with the potential to be immune, then I believe there's another theory to be evaluated. If you've watched my latest ReZero Cut content videos, then you'd remember how the light novels briefly compared Daphne's powers to that of a veritable god. Knowing this, it's not too far-fetched to consider the witches to be the closest entities to gods in the world of ReZero. At least that we know of anyway. So if we assume this to be true, then Subaru's authority of return by death amounts to that of a power that was given to him by a god. And it's that relationship that he has with the Witch of Envy that I think grants him that immunity to time stop. Of course, this is all just speculation on my part, but it is still pretty fun to theorize. As for something a little bit more concrete, the book that Roswaal is always seen holding has been a significant reference this entire time. I never pointed it out in the first season because it would have been a pretty big spoiler. But now that we've all seen Season 2, Episode 9, I think we can finally talk about what it is. As I'm sure you've pieced together, this is the same book from here. One of 2 original copies of the Tome of Wisdom. A book that allows the reader to read into the future. It's likely the reason why Roswaal was able to prevent himself from falling after Aqua had moved his chair from under him. The book probably showed that that was what was going to happen. Without it, I don't think that Roswaal would have known to use his flight in that situation. In the post-credits, there was a very slight nod to Demiurge's extremely high intellect. We know that the answers are supposed to align to make an outline of Pandora's actor's face. That much was given when we saw Ainz's answers. I mean, he's pretty lucky that the person who wrote the test is also a being that he personally created. So that mutual understanding is what likely led him to get a perfect score. But unlike Weiser Visha, who had a couple outliers, Demiurge also had that same distinct outline of Pandora's actor's face marked on his paper. Plus, he didn't even need that same mutual understanding that Ainz had. It just goes to highlight the superior level of intellect he possesses in comparison to everyone else in Nazarick. I mean, the only people who can possibly keep up with him are Albedo and Pandora's actor. Now, episode 5 brings us to the Valentine's Day arc. In the beginning, Megumin showed a lot of knowledge on the holiday despite not being from a place that celebrates it. This is because in the novels, Kazuma actually took the time to tell her about it. It was a cut scene that was supposed to take place during the movie. That's why she seemed to know so much about his previous Valentine's Days. As for Weiss, his fascination with chocolate isn't entirely unfounded. In episode 8 of the Yojo Shenki Chibi anime series, there's a little skit that goes to show that Weiss's preference after beer is chocolate. So it's kinda like a running gag that chocolate is something that he seems to enjoy. There were 2 instances in this episode where characters from ReZero used their abilities. For Rem, although the anime translated her magic spell to Alhuma, that's technically not the actual ability that she used. Alhuma is typically used to create a 10-meter long spear of ice, the maximum of which she can make is 4. But what we saw was more of a barrage of multiple smaller ice spears, something that's more akin to her Alhuma ability. On the other hand, we got to see Betelgeuse fly through the air like how he did in his final episodes. Then the handprints from after his impact with the ground was a nice little reference to his unseen hand authority, an ability that also seemed to manifest within Albedo's chocolate. It mirrors the very same effect the unseen hands had on Amelia during the second ReZero opening. A minor detail you may not know about this authority is that Betelgeuse can typically only ever conjure 7 hands at a time, which also happens to be the same number of hands that we see in Albedo's chocolate. There are, however, times where he can use more than 7 hands, but that's only when the witch factor that he used to create his fingers are returned to him. This was a little detail left out during the final episodes of ReZero's first season. They never really did fully explain how it was that Betelgeuse created his special group of the 10 fingers. Anyway, the ending credits gave us a whole bunch of reaction scenes to various characters receiving their chocolates. a couple of which I think are worth mentioning. At the beginning, we got to see 2 boxes of chocolate that are implied to belong to Sibas and Wilhelm. Sibas's was obviously for Tuare, and Wilhelm's was definitely for Teresia. But what's interesting to note is that on Wilhelm's box there's a dove carrying flowers. These aren't just any generic flower though. They're the very same flowers from the field where Wilhelm and Teresia first met. The same flowers that she seemed to love so much and visit every day. So that was a nice little nod to Teresia's character. For something a little bit more lighthearted, Yunyan's chocolate was definitely more than likely fake. I mean, the label on them does say friendship chocolate, but you know as well as I do that Yunyan doesn't have any friends. Plus, she's always trying to make it seem like she does. So all this chocolate was definitely another one of her plans to get people to think that she does have friends. Well, she doesn't. Finally, we have the image of Entoma eating one of Kyohoko's roaches. You'd be surprised by how often something like this actually takes place in Nazarick. I mean, it's a known fact that Entoma and Kyohoko don't get along very well. Reason being that it's not just on Valentine's Day that she likes to drop in and to make a quick snack out of Kyohoko's family. She often likes to visit his residence and eat the roaches inside, causing Kyohoko to view Entoma as a predator. This has made him start to fear her every time she decides to pay him a visit. Moving on to episode 6, the first thing to note is Subaru's response to what he enjoys the most on Kurage. I'm sure his answer of Mayo didn't mean much to anyone who hadn't read the novels. But now that we know from season 2 that both him and his family have a strange addiction to the product, it makes sense why this would be his first response. Raphtalia choosing ketchup actually refers back to a scene from episode 2 of Shield Hero. If you remember, Naofumi had taken the flag from Raphtalia's meal and put a little bit of ketchup on it. This was probably what made Raphtalia become so fond of it in the first place, whereas Naofumi was laughing because it reminded him of that moment. As for the actual Dodgeball game, there were plenty of references to various character abilities and powers, most of which you're already familiar with, like Kazuma's Steel, Aqua's God Blow, and Amelia's Spirit Magic. As for Albedo's Walls of Jericho, well, that's in fact a defensive ability that she possesses, and the submission hold she did while casting it was in reference to the wrestler Chris Jericho. Subaru being saved by Beatrice isn't too uncommon a feat to think of. But what's actually fairly common is Subaru yelling random landmarks like the Appalachian Mountains after being tossed by her. It's a running gag in the novels to see Subaru shout out a random landmark every time he's forcefully ejected from Beatrice's library. Towards the end, Ainz had used the 9th tier spell Nuclear Blast, an AoE attack that creates a shockwave consisting of half fire damage and half bludgeoning damage. Normally it's used to cause destruction to a very large area, but in this case, Ainz seemed to scale it down quite a bit, likely using the shockwave itself to propel the ball forward then have the bludgeoning effect knock Tanya back. I mean, the spell is considered to be one of the weakest 9th tier spells in terms of damage, but it does have a tremendous amount of force to it, making it quite the ideal spell for something like a dodgeball match. Anyway, that was pretty much it for episode 6. Now, just so that you don't complain about me not talking about the bit in the thumbnail, this actually isn't the first time that we've seen Roswaal teach a lesson that foreshadows events from Season 2. The rabbits was one that you wouldn't have been aware of had you not seen Season 2 Episode 8. But there's another lesson from the very first episode covering a topic that pertains to something still yet to come. So if you want a small teaser with regards to what's going to happen at the mansion, then I recommend rewatching the first episode of Isekai Quartet's second season. But yeah, that's every Easter egg and reference that I could find from episodes 4 to 6. If you happen to come across any of your own, then feel free to share them in the comments as well. Now, before I go, I'd like to thank Era of Light once again for sponsoring this video. If you're interested in checking out their Tower of God collaboration event, then you can use the link in the description to download the game for free today. And don't forget, by just opening the game you can choose to get Eerie Bomber White for free. Now, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!